What if a single, invisible event, one you never heard about, sealed the fate of an entire front line? Picture a moment in history that never makes headlines, a moment so deeply buried beneath layers of secrecy and confusion that to the world at large, it might as well never have happened. Yet for those in the know, generals, soldiers, diplomats, and the quietly desperate families waiting for word at home, it is the moment when everything changes. Wars are often remembered for their climactic battles, their grand speeches, and their parades of tanks. But the true anatomy of defeat is often found in the unseen, in the hidden failures that precede collapse. On the night of the 15th of October, 2025, such a moment unfolded in the port of Chornomorsk. There were no urgent broadcasts or frantic newscasters. The world slept, dreaming of peace or victory, oblivious to the storm brewing on the Black Sea's edge. Yet, beneath the velvet darkness unique to autumn's heart, a precision strike found its mark. A secret military cargo, camouflaged among the civilian containers and idle cranes, was obliterated in a single surgical blast. Almost no one outside a tight classified circle knew what was hidden there, or who exactly was responsible for its safekeeping. When the explosion tore through the steel and concrete, it sent shockwaves far beyond the silent docks. The effects echoed through the trenches of Ukraine's east, unraveling positions that, only days before, had seemed unbreakable. In an instant, the fate of thousands was altered by an event that would, for most of the world, remain unspoken. Official channels went quiet. Western advisors offered no comment. The secrecy itself hinted at something far bigger. This was not just another night of missiles and sirens. It was the moment the war's balance shifted, exposing vulnerabilities the enemy had been waiting to exploit. Ignore this story, and you miss the true anatomy of defeat in modern war. It is not always the frontline firefight that decides a nation's fate. Sometimes, collapse begins in the shadows, where secrets, trust, and logistics are the only things holding an army together. We are about to step into that darkness, back to the night when everything changed at Chornomorsk. Let us uncover what really happened, and why this single strike might have rewritten the future. To understand why this one strike mattered so much, we must first see what made Chornomorsk more than just another port. Beneath its ordinary surface, a hidden web of supply and secrecy was about to unravel. Ports are the arteries of any war effort, but Chornomorsk was more than a logistical node. It was a lifeline, a critical hinge for the entire Eastern Front, where the difference between holding and losing ground could be measured in the hours it took for a single ship to unload its cargo. Why would a determined enemy throw every asset at what appears to be a routine shipment? To answer that, we must step into the charged, inky night of the 15th of October, when the coast near Odessa vanished beneath a velvet shadow unique to autumn's heart. The port of Chornomorsk, silent and foreboding, loomed as a lifeline, its cranes and piers little more than silhouettes against the restless Black Sea, holding their breath for dawn or disaster. This was not a night for routine. The air itself seemed brittle with anticipation, every local attuned to the static hum of something coming. Then, without warning, the sky split open with pulsing, unnatural flashes. Nothing like the lights of working vessels or port machinery. These were the sickly signatures of incoming danger. Within moments, Ukraine's air defense systems roared to life. Crews raced to battle stations, pushing their strained networks far beyond comfort. The first missiles crested the horizon. This was not an ordinary raid. It was a sustained, multi-layered assault, each attack group more calculated, more merciless than the last, leaving defenders no time to regroup or breathe. Chornomorsk was not chosen by chance. The port was the Eastern Front's main artery, pumping weapons and supplies crucial to Ukraine's defense. The attackers had studied this. Their goal was chilling in its clarity: overwhelm the shield, break the chain, and suffocate the war effort at its source. Wave followed wave, each one amplifying the chaos. Missiles used deceptive arcs and staggered timing to wear down the interceptors. Under this orchestrated storm, a single missile group finally exploited a fleeting gap in the defenses. The explosion that followed was surgical and devastating, a concussive blast that shattered windows for kilometers, lit up the night with hellish brilliance, and sent shockwaves rippling through the port's core. In that blinding instant, everything changed. Observers understood. This was not a typical night raid. It was a deliberate strike, meant not simply to destroy, but to cripple and to warn. Anyone failing to see the scale and intent of this attack would miss just how exposed military logistics truly are. How the collapse of trust, the loss of a single node, or even one breach in transparency can threaten not just resources, but territory, morale, and an entire nation's survival. To grasp the enormity, consider the lessons of history. In the Second World War, the Allies' Normandy landings depended utterly on the security of their supply lines. When German U-boats cut through convoys in the Atlantic, entire offensives risked stalling. In the Vietnam War, the Ho Chi Minh Trail became a target for relentless bombing. Each time the route was severed, North Vietnamese forces scrambled to repair their lifeline. The difference in Chornomorsk? The secrecy was deeper, the stakes perhaps even higher, and the consequences more immediate. Here, a single night's loss would ripple not for weeks, but for hours, directly affecting the men and women at the front. Yet, a crucial question remains. What made this particular cargo, and this particular night, the focus of such a ruthless operation? To understand the attacker's obsession, we must rewind the clock and examine the secret cargo's origins, and the chain of decisions that led to its arrival in Chornomorsk. When catastrophe ignites, what buried truths are forced into the open? Chornomorsk did not simply burn. On the night of the 15th of October, 2025, the port became an inferno. The first detonation shattered the pre-dawn silence, but it was only the beginning. A chain of eruptions, each fiercer than the last, consumed the district in a matter of minutes. Sulfurous smoke billowed hundreds of meters upward, a dark, toxic mushroom cloud drifting for tens of kilometers across the Black Sea and over the city. The sky glowed hellish red, visible from distant villages, a signal of disaster that no one could ignore. Firefighters raced in, sirens wailing, but the blaze was untouchable. Their mission was not rescue, but containment, an attempt to halt the fire's spread as flames leapt from one warehouse to the next. The port's entire reserves, munitions, aviation fuel, sealed drums marked with chemical warnings, fed the conflagration. No plan could cope. The men on the ground fought not to win, but to survive. Beneath the chaos, deeper failures emerged. Radios crackled with confusion. Orders contradicted one another, some calling for evacuation, others for impossible heroics. Each minute lost to indecision allowed the fire to claim more ground. The tangle of bureaucracy, meant to protect, instead strangled the response. Whispers of sabotage and internal betrayal began to flow even as the flames raged. At the heart of the destruction was a secret shipment. Its arrival had been cloaked in extraordinary measures: unmarked trucks, restricted manifests, fewer than a dozen trusted handlers. The cargo's exact nature was classified at the highest level, but every clue pointed to something beyond ordinary arms. State-of-the-art missile systems, perhaps foreign prototypes, destined for the embattled Eastern Front. The fate of entire divisions could turn on their safe arrival. To guarantee this, Western eyes had come in person. NATO officers and foreign liaisons observed every step, bringing a layer of oversight meant to reinforce trust between Ukraine and its allies. Their presence, intended as reassurance, now became a liability. The strike's timing was no accident. It struck not just materiel, but morale and alliance, wounding both with a single blow. Foreign officers were caught in the blast zone. Questions of safety and of betrayal spread rapidly through diplomatic channels. Each misstep, each missed signal, became more than a technical error. With every hour of chaos, not only was vital equipment lost, but so was the credibility of Ukraine's military command. Allies watched in real time as supposed safeguards failed. Aid might stall. Some began to wonder if the front itself could hold. The fire at Chornomorsk was more than a disaster. It was an alarm, a warning that the careful web of secrecy and trust holding Ukraine's war effort together was fraying, and that the next failure might prove fatal. As the sun rose over the ruined port, the full scale of the disaster became clear, both to those on the ground and to distant capitals. The consequences would be swift and far-reaching, shaking foundations well beyond Chornomorsk. How does a single distant explosion send shockwaves through an entire war? Chornomorsk was supposed to be just another shadowed port, until that night in mid-October, when a single secret military shipment vanished in fire. In those brief seconds, more than hardware was lost. A fragile lifeline, binding together Ukraine's eastern defenses, was torn apart. Insiders whispered that the destroyed cargo included long-range missiles, advanced air defense components, and perhaps even irreplaceable elements of the coveted Patriot system. These were not merely weapons. They were Ukraine's last line of assurance, guardians purchased with hard-won trust and at a staggering price. The timing was merciless. As flames still curled above Chornomorsk, Russian forces launched coordinated assaults across the eastern front. It was no accident. Enemy intelligence had waited for this crack in Ukraine's armor, striking swiftly when supply lines snapped and command was at its most confused. Within days, the impact spiraled outward. Ammunition shortages swept through the trenches like a chill. Ukrainian soldiers, expecting fresh stockpiles and reinforcements, found only empty crates and radios filled with static. Planned counterattacks dissolved, starved of missiles and shells. Outgunned defenders were forced to retreat, not by choice, but by necessity, losing ground inch by inch as their options withered. Official communiques hid behind careful words, logistical adjustments, and unexpected setbacks. But in the frozen mud of Donbass, the real story traveled quickly. Morale began to fracture as troops realized that a single lost convoy, in one night of chaos, had left entire sectors exposed and vulnerable. The sense of betrayal ran deep, spreading beyond the front lines, shaking the faith of every ally watching from afar. For Ukraine's Western partners, the disaster was a stark alarm. But instead of rallying to fill the gap, they responded with caution and suspicion. New controls were imposed. Stricter audits, endless paperwork, and layers of bureaucracy now trailed every shipment. The irony was bitter. Efforts to prevent future disasters only slowed the flow of vital aid, making every delay another risk, every hesitation a potential repeat of catastrophe. The lesson was as cold and sharp as winter steel. In modern war, trust is as valuable as weapons or fuel. Without secure, rapid, and credible logistics, entire fronts can unravel, costing not only lives and land, but also the chance to recover momentum, perhaps forever. All eyes turned to Kyiv, where frantic efforts began to patch the breach and reclaim lost ground. But by then, the consequences had already begun to spiral out of control. Can any modern army survive another night like the one in Chornomorsk? To answer this, let us look at the long shadow cast by similar disasters in military history. In 1944, during the Second World War, the Allies suffered the loss of the port of Antwerp to a sudden German counterattack. Supplies piled up on the beaches, but without a secure harbor, the advance stalled. In Korea, the loss of supply depots in Seoul in 1950 forced United Nations forces to fall back, not because they were outfought, but because they literally ran out of bullets and food. In Afghanistan, the Taliban's ability to sever NATO's convoys through the Khyber Pass turned a robust logistical network into a liability. Each time, the loss of a single node, whether a port, a bridge, or a convoy, forced armies to either improvise or retreat. The whole world has now witnessed what happens when Western oversight, intended to guarantee control, transforms in an instant into a deadly liability. Measures meant to safeguard critical equipment instead mark every partner, every convoy, every depot with a glowing target. Trust, once a shield, mutates into stark vulnerability. Now, Ukraine's allies confront an agonizing dilemma. Should they risk their own personnel and reputations by insisting on tightly supervised deliveries, or let their most advanced arms slip into the fog of war, lost to corruption, misdirection, or outright annihilation? Most will choose the only path their bureaucracies know: more regulations, heavier paperwork, smaller shipments, and ever thicker layers of red tape. Each new safeguard slows the machine at the worst possible moment, when speed decides who lives and who dies. Every additional hour of delay bleeds lives from the front. Each day lost means another village razed, another vital position overrun, and another thread snapped from the fragile chain of trust. Organizational collapse is not just about missing crates or fractured contracts. It breeds exhaustion and post-traumatic stress among logisticians, burnout in command centers, and a spreading rot of inefficiency all the way down to the trenches. These invisible wounds cut as deep as any enemy shell. Political and command upheaval will follow. Faces will change, scapegoats will be paraded, and leaders will be shuffled. But swapping drivers in a burning truck does nothing if the flames are allowed to spread unchecked. If armies and their patrons refuse to learn from Chornomorsk, if transparency and resilient logistics are not woven into the core of the system, then calamity is only a matter of time. Secrecy and bureaucracy are not armor. They are the fuse, lying in wait for the next spark. So now, as smoke drifts over ruined docks and lessons hang heavy in the air, a new question emerges. What must truly change to prevent this horror from repeating? And if nothing changes, who will bleed for it when the sirens scream again? In the aftermath, the world's attention turns to the architects of this disaster. Are they ready to confront what their systems have unleashed, or will denial doom them to repeat the cycle? History will not spare those who let silence, suspicion, or layers of bureaucratic delay decide a nation's fate. This crisis is not about the loss of one night, one port, or even one country. What unfolded in Chornomorsk on the 15th of October, 2025, exposed something deeper. Military might can crumble not only under enemy fire, but within the fractures of our own systems, cracks that secrecy, mistrust, and the illusion of oversight widen each day. When the first fireball seared the skies above Odessa's coast, the world saw another act of war. But behind the flames, something more corrosive was burning: trust. Trust between commanders and soldiers, between Ukraine and its allies, and between citizens and the very institutions sworn to shield them. These invisible bonds, fragile but vital, can snap in a heartbeat if neglected. Western oversight committees, foreign advisors, and endless chains of command were meant to ensure security. Instead, in a labyrinth of paperwork and secret channels, information suffocated. Orders became muddled or stalled. Supplies vanished into the fog of shared but unclaimed responsibility. Silence became an accomplice. Each ignored warning, and every buried report left the front lines weaker, not from a lack of bravery, but from a lack of clarity. The collapse of logistical trust moved faster than any missile, cutting through morale, shattering reputations, and putting every hard-gained meter of ground at risk. Who bears the blame? Not only the generals who paused or the politicians who recast the story, but every individual in a machine that allowed secrets, doubts, and bureaucracy to replace honest communication and swift action. True strength is not measured by how many tanks stand in a line, but by how quickly and openly a force can adapt when disaster strikes. If these lessons are ignored, the next collapse will be worse, and the fallout will not stop at Ukraine's borders. Allies will question if their aid is squandered. Adversaries will see the weak seams. All will pay the price, in wasted resources, broken alliances, and lives lost to mistakes that could have been stopped. Here lies the hard truth. A nation's survival depends not just on firepower, but on the resilience of its systems, and on the courage to demand accountability at every step, from the highest commander to the lowest link in the chain. Unless we face these invisible failures, the cycle will repeat, and the cost will grow. Yet catastrophe can force a reckoning. If exposed wounds demand change, the story need not end here. What, then, are the practical steps to ensure such a disaster cannot happen again? The answer lies in a blend of historical wisdom, real-world reforms, and the hard-earned lessons of recent wars. Let us chart a path forward, step by step, examining how nations and militaries have rebuilt trust after catastrophe, and how Ukraine and its allies might do the same. First, transparency must become more than a buzzword. All too often, the fog of war thickens in the absence of clear and honest reporting. After the My Lai massacre in Vietnam, it took whistleblowers and investigative journalists to unveil the truth, prompting reforms in military oversight and accountability. Likewise, after the Chornomorsk disaster, Ukraine must establish independent audit teams, composed not only of military insiders, but also of civilian experts and international observers, empowered to track every shipment from dock to depot. Modern technology offers tools the Allies never dreamed of in the Second World War. Blockchain-based inventory systems, real-time satellite monitoring, and encrypted communications can provide a transparent, tamper-proof record of every transfer. Second, logistics must be decentralized and made resilient. The Israeli Defense Forces learned hard lessons during the Yom Kippur War, when centralized depots became single points of failure under attack. In response, they developed a network of dispersed supply caches, each capable of supporting frontline units for days or weeks if the main lines were severed. Ukraine can adopt a similar approach, storing critical munitions and fuel in multiple secure locations, rotating stockpiles, and practicing rapid, unpredictable resupply routes. This not only frustrates enemy targeting, but also ensures that no single strike can collapse the front. Third, training and culture must shift. The best systems in the world are only as good as the people who operate them. In the aftermath of the Challenger disaster, NASA overhauled its internal culture, encouraging engineers and astronauts to speak up, challenge authority, and report concerns without fear of reprisal. Ukraine's command structure must reward initiative and honesty, not blind compliance or secrecy. Simulations and war games, already a staple in Western militaries, can be used to stress-test supply chains, identify weak links, and build a culture of rapid adaptation. Fourth, alliances must be reimagined. The Chornomorsk strike exposed not only vulnerabilities in Ukrainian logistics, but also in the entire web of Western support. Joint command centers, shared intelligence networks, and unified rules of engagement can prevent the confusion and finger-pointing that paralyze the response. NATO's experience in Afghanistan showed that multinational coordination is possible, but only when roles are clear, channels are open, and trust is earned daily, not assumed. Ukraine and its allies must review every protocol, clarify every responsibility, and rehearse joint crisis responses as rigorously as they train for combat operations. Fifth, rapid response mechanisms must be institutionalized. When disaster strikes, hesitation is deadly. After the 2011 Tohoku earthquake and tsunami, Japan's self-defense forces swung into action within hours, deploying pre-packed emergency kits, mobile command posts, and flexible logistics teams. Ukraine must develop similar rapid response units, capable of bypassing bureaucratic delays and delivering critical materiel wherever and whenever it is needed, even if that means breaking with tradition or protocol. Sixth, communication with the public and the rank and file must be prioritized. Rumors and uncertainty are as dangerous as enemy fire. After the 2005 Hurricane Katrina disaster, the U.S. government learned the hard way that silence breeds panic and distrust. Ukraine's leadership must provide regular, honest updates, not just to foreign partners, but to its own soldiers and citizens. Openness in crisis breeds resilience, while secrecy and spin sow chaos. Finally, accountability must be swift and impartial. Investigations into the Chornomorsk disaster must be thorough and public, assigning responsibility where it is due and learning from every failure. Historical examples abound. After the sinking of the HMS Hood in 1941, the Royal Navy conducted exhaustive inquiries, publishing findings and implementing reforms that saved countless lives in later battles. Ukraine's future depends on its willingness to confront hard truths, punish negligence, and reward integrity. Imagine for a moment a different outcome in Chornomorsk. Suppose that, weeks before the attack, audit teams flagged anomalies in cargo manifests. Encrypted alerts were sent up the chain, and rapid response units reinforced air defense batteries at the port. Supplies had already been dispersed to hidden caches inland. When the first missile struck, the main depot was empty, and backup systems kicked in. Foreign advisors, following a robust crisis protocol, evacuated in time, and within hours, public briefings reassured both allies and citizens that the war effort remained unbroken. Such a scenario is not a fantasy. It is a roadmap, built from the lessons of past failures and the possibilities of modern technology and organization. The true test of any army, and any alliance, is not whether disaster can be prevented, but how swiftly and honestly it can recover. Chornomorsk's lessons are harsh, but they are not unique. Every military in history, from Rome's legions to NATO's expeditionary forces, has faced moments when a single night's loss threatened to unravel years of effort. The difference between survival and defeat lies in the willingness to adapt. As the world weighs the cost of inaction, Ukraine and its partners must make a choice. Will they double down on secrecy and bureaucracy, hoping that lightning will not strike twice? Or will they seize this moment to rebuild trust, reform logistics, and prepare for the next crisis, one that may come not in a decade, but tomorrow? In the end, the night at Chornomorsk is a warning, not a verdict. The future is unwritten. But if the lessons are ignored, history guarantees only one thing: the next crisis will be worse, and the price, measured in lives, land, and lost hope, will be higher still. The anatomy of defeat is written not in the headlines of battles won or lost, but in the silent failures of systems unseen. Let the night of the 15th of October, 2025, be remembered not just as a tragedy, but as a turning point, a call to vigilance, transparency, and the unyielding pursuit of trust. Only then can the cycle of collapse be broken, and a new future, built not in shadow, but in light, begin.